Hello, I'm Miloš Revinsky and this is Break the Fake. They make them, we break them, and tell you all you need to know. An Iranian court has sentenced popular rapper Tomasz Salehi to death. In October 2022, he was arrested over his support for the protests that swept the country that year in the wake of the death of Mahsa Amini. On the 11th of July 2023, he was sentenced to 6 years behind bars, then was released on bail in November 2023 and finally arrested again after he spoke out about the torture and ill treatment he suffered behind bars. Unfortunately, it seems that his honesty will now bring him before the executioner. That's the difference between democracies and authoritarian states, by the way. In the former, you face angry online critics. In the latter, a firing squad.
8 سال زیر بار توپ خیز هنوز به خاکش خونه سینه دشمن سوخته کمر از حاکم پاره پوره بیب بیب میرزه یگان اگه در بری که مین میگیره به پات جلو دشمن.
It is no coincidence that we began with a segment on Iran. Recently, we've been seeing increased activity from operatives of what George W. Bush called the axis of evil, which is not exactly good news for the world. Soon after wrapping up a large-scale exercise of a nuclear counterattack, a delegation from North Korea arrived in Iran. The two regimes have long been suspected of collaborating on their ballistic missile programs, most likely exchanging technical know-how and manufacturing components. Security services of NATO countries have long suspected that Pyongyang and Tehran are maintaining close military ties. The last time high-ranking DPRK officials visited Tehran was in August 2019, when the delegation was headed by Deputy Head of Parliament, Park Cho-min. It all fits, by the way. Affinity for missiles, miserable human rights record, and remember, in North Korea, you can reportedly get into jail, or worse, for listening to K-pop. So, there you have it. It must be sheer coincidence that at the same time as that particular meeting happened, Nikolai Patrushev, Secretary of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, was hosting Ali Akbar Ahmadian, the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, in Moscow. What did the two peace doves talk about? Well, officially, the two sides exchanged views on the situation in the Middle East, reaffirming their desire to avoid continued escalation of tensions. Well, if top Russian and Iranian security officials are meeting, you can be sure they are talking world peace and relieving international tensions. Yeah, right. Sadly, we're bound to realize what the three regimes were scheming about sooner or later. But one thing we can be sure of today, it won't be anything good. Now, why don't we take a brief look at the temple of world peace that is the Russian state television? Notice the sarcasm. As usual, it's not hard to come across another show that Orwell would easily recognize as an incarnation of his infamous 2 minutes hate. This time, we found the red-nosed excellency Solovyov spinning nonsense about raising Poland and France to the ground. Why these two countries specifically? Well, let's take a look.
Но мы должны спокойно сказать, французы высаживаются, мы уничтожаем штаб-квартиру французов на территории Франции. Мы наносим удары по территории Польши и конфедерации. Мы топим суда, которые перевозят Брэдли. Мы уничтожаем базы хранения. Если мы знаем, что это оружие предназначено для удара по России, то мы официально заявляем. Весь маршрут, неважно, где он проходит, является законной целью.
Но тогда надо с ними говорить на том языке, который они понимают.
Да, о чем я и говорю. Вот об этом поэтому должны быть взорваны к ядрене фени, трубопроводы, нефтепроводы, вот это все. За месть должна быть жесточайшая месть. Принцип очень простой. Как в дипломатии.
Вот.
А там же как? Там же симметричность ответа должна быть.
Абсолютно.
Они взорвали нашу инфраструктуру, не знают кто, и мы не знаем, кто сейчас взорвет, чертовой матери, всю их.
Brutality and diplomacy in a single sentence makes perfect sense, at least if you're Vladimir Solovyov. Now, in recent weeks, Russia has been working hard in Moldova, spreading fake news intended to smear the image of the West in the eyes of the Moldovan public and put a halt to their pro-European shift. Just days ago, a story surfaced from a quote-unquote unknown source alleging that Poland is taking the illegal migrants storming its border with Belarus and shipping them to Moldova. The next presidential elections in Moldova are scheduled for the fall of 2024. The incumbent Maia Sandu will seek re-election on a platform of integration with the European Union and the West. According to one of the latest polls, the pro-Russian politician Igor Dodon might be her biggest opponent. Surprise, surprise. Okay, back to the land of milk, honey and nukes. Russia. A 47-year-old wounded Russian soldier from the village of Ivanovo recently came back home from the front lines of Ukraine. Do you think he was missing his family and his town? Well, let's take a look at a clip showing how well the homecoming went.
За что? За то, что ты пидоров. Ты за Россию вообще? Я за Америку. Ты против войны?
Я против войны.
Против войны? Сука, блядь, ебать. Сука. Хочешь умереть, сучка?
Зачем?
Блядина.
Зачем мне?
Ты сучка ебаная. Ты сучка. Ты сучка. Сучка. Ебаная. У тебя... Ты, сука, против войны, у тебя, блядь, как его... Жетончик вон там, блядь, да? Ну, это как его... Ты понимаешь? Да. Ты, гандон ебаный.
С гравировкой?
Мы вас скоро будем ебать. Ебать.
С гравировкой
антимилитари.
Да.
Мерзи.
Что означает антимилитари?
Что ты залупа ебаная.
Антивоенное движение.
Что ты залупа ебаная. Понял, сучка? Да пошел ты нахуй вообще, блядь, животное. Животное, пошел ты нахуй. Сбрей хуйню, иди в армию, блядь, ты, сука. За Россию, сука. За Россию иди, сука. За Иванова, блядь.
Forget Atomic Heart. This is the real, authentic Russian take on a first-person shooter. The guy went ballistic, seeing a person wearing an anti-war pin, and went so far as to draw his weapon and threaten to shoot them for the imagined offense. We all know that war changes a person. You see people you consider your brothers die all around you and come to see every day as your last. But it does something even worse to Russian soldiers, and they tend to bring the war home. Many of them seem so far gone that it no longer matters who they kill, whether it's Ukrainians or, their own kind. Just yesterday, we introduced you to Timor Ivanov, Russia's deputy defense minister, who was suddenly arrested on charges of accepting a bribe. Is there more news about the man? Of course there is. Pull your chair up and let's go. After his arrest on Wednesday, this morning, a Moscow court ordered him to remain in custody until the 23rd of June.
Иванову Тимору Владимировичу меру пресечения без заключения по стражу. Установив срок его содержания по стражу на 2 месяца суток, то есть до 23 июля 2024 года.
Aside from throwing him into jail for the time being, the court also seized his real estate assets and bank accounts. According to a law enforcement source cited by the Russian news agency TASS, all assets registered to Timor Ivanov and his immediate family, including wife, ex-wives and 5 children, even his foster kids, have been seized. The value of the overall seizure has not been released. In the clip ahead, you're about to see the villa that Ivanov lived in. Talk about freezing and seizing. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu also signed a decree that removed Ivanov from the deputy minister's post, citing 2 sources close to the Russian FSB. The investigative website's iStories revealed that the real motive for Ivanov's arrest was suspicion of treason, adding that he would not be detained for something so widespread as corruption. The sources also said that Putin gave the green light only after he was convinced that Ivanov was harboring treasonous intent. The lawyer for the former deputy minister told RIA Novosti, meanwhile, that his client has only been charged with accepting bribes and the rumors of treason are false. Also, let's face it, in the Russian society, bribery is not a bug, it's a feature. Applied both domestically and abroad, I mean, what do you think is the secret behind so many Westerners suddenly discovering their love of the Kremlin's narratives? Money changing hands behind the scenes is absolutely fine in the Russian world, as long as the hands in question are the right hands. From innocent Russian goths held at gunpoint to confiscated mansions has been a very busy episode, but now it's come to an end. I'm Nasha Levinsky. Please stay with us here on TVP World.